The Only Road, Chapter 10. On Jaime and Angela's second day at Padre Kevin's refuge, just as the sun was losing its battle with nighttime, a white Mercedes with black-tinted windows roared down the street and braked in front of the church with a huge cloud of dust. The football players abandoned their game quickly to avoid getting hit. Jaime hugged his bag tight to his chest. The other kids who had possessions did the same. Angela grabbed Joaquin's hand, or maybe it was the other way around. Xavi scooped up Vida, who had been snoozing away her injuries while they played in the street. Rafa, who not only lost all his money in the dogfight, but was also beaten up for trying to win it back, pulled his cap low over his face. Still, everyone, including Vida, watched the doors of the Mercedes open. From the driver's seat, huge hands pressed against the open door and the roof to extract a body too large for the sleek sports car, like an oozing snail escaping a confining shell. The stench of expensive cologne wafted from the large man, reminding Jaime of rotten eggs preserved in alcohol. He almost didn't notice a second man slip out of the passenger side inconspicuously. The giant slug was completely bald, but made up for it with such a thick black mustache it looked like an animal had stuck itself to his lip. He wore a white linen shirt and slacks with a polished black belt and shoes. The day's remaining sunshine reflected off his clothes and shiny head. El Gordo had arrived. "Kevin!" he yelled, even though the Padre had exited the church as soon as he heard the engine's roar. Padre Kevin walked toward the giant. The men were similar, both large and bald, but the contrast between them was stark. Today, the Padre donned rainbow-striped shorts and a lime-green shirt that in 6 pictures showed the evolution from ape to saint. On closer inspection, El Gordo did look a bit like the first Neanderthal-type image on the Padre's shirt. Padre Kevin nodded to the men as if to imply that he at least hadn't forgotten courtesy. "Don Gordo?" El Gordo surveyed the crowd that had leaked out of the church and come from the growth along the river at the sound of his arrival. While yesterday there had been 100 refugees sheltered at the church, and some had already left, like the girl with the baby, now there were closer to 150, and most of them were present. "They breed like rabbits and infest us like parasites, don't they?" El Gordo said to Padre Kevin and laughed. Padre Kevin didn't find the joke funny, nor did any of the people watching and listening. So he clapped his hands. It was hard to tell with his mustache covering most of his mouth, but Jaime was pretty sure El Gordo was giving the crowd his widest grin, as if he were about to devour them. "Which of you little pissants is going on the train early tomorrow morning?" Jaime and Angela looked at each other out of the corner of their eyes. Neither wanted to draw attention to themselves, let alone speak with this man. Maybe there was some way to get on the train without having to deal with El Gordo. Everyone else seemed to feel the same way. No one said a word, not even a minute of being stared down. No one said a word, even after a minute of being stared down. Padre Kevin did nothing to encourage anyone to speak up. He kept his eyes averted from El Gordo as he muttered words that might have been prayers but could have been insults. Jaime shivered as El Gordo laughed again and surveyed the crowd. "I'm kidding! I love you guys. 12 of you have already paid to ride the train. If you don't tell me who you are, there are no refunds." One man in a blue bandana lifted his arm slowly, followed by a woman with 2 children. A girl about 5 years old and a boy about 7. A few others hesitated before raising their hands. Jaime had to force his arm up. Worse was when they had to give their names to confirm against the list that El Gordo kept somewhere in his thick skull. Jaime was sure something would go wrong. It did, but for someone else. El Gordo nodded as if he were bored when Jaime and Angela told him who they were. It was the next man who wasn't so lucky. "I don't have a Gonzalez," the smuggler said. He tried to cross his arms over his chest, except his arms were too large to complete the crossed X. The man bobbed his head uncontrollably. "Sí, Octavio Gonzalez Peña. No Gonzalez, no Peña." El Gordo scratched his mustache. Jaime imagined fleas colonizing his monstrous mustache and knew how he'd draw El Gordo later. The man kept bobbing his head, an action that made him sweat profusely. "But my wife paid. We sold everything we own, paid a man named Chewy who was going to give it to you." El Gordo shrugged. "I don't know this Chewy, and I didn't get it. Maybe you need to get yourself a new wife." He winked at Padre, but the Padre made no response. "She did pay, she did." The man's face crumbled and he flung himself to the ground, crying on El Gordo's shiny shoes. Huge mistake. El Gordo swung his leg and caught the man right in the ear. "I need 4,000 pesos before I get you safe passage." El Gordo turned away from the hysterical man and addressed everyone else. "That's right, only 4,000 pesos. That's not very much for a guaranteed safe ride on the train, let me tell you. If you don't go through me, half of you won't make the train ride in one piece, not with the immigration checkpoints or the gangs that control the rail lines, ready to beat you up or throw you off the moving train." A man with buzzed hair swallowed and limped forward. Two men who looked like brothers with matching round bellies kept their eyes down as they shuffled toward El Gordo as well. They extracted money from their pockets, socks, and underwear. El Gordo snapped his fingers at his minion. Until that moment, Jaime had forgotten about the second man, who now counted the crumpled and dirty notes before nodding to his boss that the right amount was there. When it looked like no one else had any money for a safe passage aboard the train, El Gordo turned back to his immaculate car. "We'll come back for those of you who've paid or changed your mind at 1 o'clock in the morning. The rest of you who are going to face the beast, thanks for feeding the vultures." He laughed again and motioned to his minion, who popped open the trunk with the push of a button. From there, the minion extracted a leg of raw meat. Jaime hoped it was pork or beef and not something more sinister. The minion went through the trees by the river and slapped the meat on the table outside the kitchen that held their meals. "For your troubles, Kevin." El Gordo waved a fat hand at the food. "Always a pleasure doing business with you." And once more his laughter rang across the street. "Of course. God thanks you," Kevin Padre said through his tight lips. It took a couple of minutes for El Gordo to squeeze himself back into the cramped driver's seat, and then he and his minion were gone. A collective sigh, almost as loud as El Gordo's satanic laughter, vibrated in the now quiet street. No one's sigh was louder than Padre Kevin's. People shuffled back into the church or returned to their previous activities. Yesterday's grumpy woman got Cesar and some other boys to haul the meat into the kitchen and ordered some women to help her cook it. Jaime and his friends looked at the semi-deflated ball and seemed to agree the football game was over. 300 boys who had been playing football with them shoved their hands in their pockets. 4,000 pesos? "Who does that fat cat think he is?" said Gusti, one of the best strikers Jaime had ever played with. Sebastian, who preferred refereeing to playing, grumbled, "I bet he just takes the money and feeds people to La Migra." "Any chance we can come up with 4,000 pesos in 6 hours?" asked Omar, who had been their goalkeeper. "Sure," Gusti smirked, "if a purse of money falls from the heavens." The other two boys stared at the overcast sky for a few seconds as if wondering whether there was any chance of that happening. As they headed to the street, Omar picked up an empty beer bottle lying in the bushes. They could get a couple of copper coins for the glass. At that rate, they would need thousands of bottles to earn enough to pay El Gordo. "Our parents paid double that," Angela muttered under her breath. She took Jaime's hand, and they turned to walk back into the church with their other friends. Jaime worked the math in his head to figure out how much that translated into Guatemalan quetzales, about his father's 3-month salary. He hated thinking of the trouble he'd caused everyone. Their whole family must have chipped in. The women Mama worked for must have given her loans. Tomas probably sent his wages too, all to be overcharged. But there was nothing they could do. They certainly couldn't ask El Gordo for a refund. Maybe they'll give us nice seats with air conditioning on the train, he joked. He didn't know what to expect. He'd never been on a train before, but he doubted El Gordo's way was even legal. We're lucky, he kept reminding himself. His family could pay for El Gordo's train, and maybe, just maybe, they were better protected as a result. I'm not surprised your parents paid more, Xavi said. There are middlemen to pay off and others who just take advantage. The ignorant are always the ones who pay more. Our parents aren't ignorant, Jaime defended quickly. I meant ignorant in terms of smuggling costs. Someone told them a price and they didn't negotiate it. Xavi did have a point. Neither his parents nor Angela's had ever made this journey, nor anyone in the immediate family. Tomas had papers and sponsorship that allowed him to travel through Mexico the whole way by bus without any complications. His parents could only go by what someone said or another recommended. If only his parents hadn't had to pay so much. If only he and Angela hadn't had to leave Guatemala. He should have been nicer to Poquita back when they were friends. He should have let the boy continue stealing from him. He should have stopped Miguel from telling Poquita they didn't want to be friends anymore. It all came down to Jaime and the ways he could have stopped any of this from happening.